Hey guys, welcome back to the next episode of the Way of the Rosary podcast. My name is Shannon Went, and I'm your host, and I'm the founder of the Way of the Rosary and Choose Life. So glad that you guys are here. Thanks for joining us again. We are switching up. So this is episode 3, and our first couple of episodes as we looked at the gift or the fruit of humility and talked about St. Francis. We split that up into 3 episodes, talking about kind of the introduction to the fruit, understanding the fruit of this mystery, and then we talked about the saint and what we really have to learn from this saint, why this saint is connected with this mystery, why this saint is uniquely qualified to teach us about this. And then the 3rd episode was getting really practical about how we can take these lessons about this fruit from our new saint friend and really apply them to our lives, like the boots on the ground. So we are still going to include all of that goodness, but after a little bit of feedback, we've decided to put this into one episode that will still have 3 parts, so you're able to watch or listen kind of little by little, but we've got it all together so that you can listen to it all in one go and you don't have to go hunt and find the next part. So making it a little bit easier, putting these 3 episodes together for you. So let's dive in. This week we are talking about the fruit of the Visitation, which is love of neighbor. And the incredible saint that we're going to be learning from this week is none other than St. Vincent de Paul. And I wanted to share a little bit of a personal story about St. Vincent de Paul, because the work that St. Vincent did really has ripple effects. It has continued through today. I mean, it's ongoing. If you look around at some of the, St. Vincent de Paul is a lot more than just a great thrift store downtown. The mission of St. Vincent de Paul is touching lives today, and it's a pretty big reason why I'm here today. When I was really little, my mom was a nurse. My mom is a nurse, and when she was a new mom, I was little. She had a patient who was about the same age as her, who had a baby about the same time that I was born. So my mom and this patient of hers kind of bonded over being first-time moms. And this other woman was a single mom. She worked as a waitress, and my mom had done a little bit to kind of help make sure she had everything that she needed when her baby came. And probably around the time that this little one, it was a little boy, and I were about 1.5 or 2 years old, this other woman broke her leg. And as a single mom who works as a waitress, that meant no income, no money for rent, no money for food. She was really in a bad place. And as her friend and her nurse, my mom stepped in to try to help her find some resources and figure out how to get some help that she needed. There were some government things that was all going to take a little while for that stuff to kind of get going and for her to get any kind of assistance. And it was a little bit of monetary assistance, but she definitely needed help in her house and help with her little one. And so my mom started calling through local charities, and we lived in a pretty big city at the time, so there were a lot of them in the area, and the secular ones were kind of at capacity. She called them first. At the time, my mom had walked away from her Catholic faith that she had grown up with and had really in her young adult years fallen into the New Age movement and really rejected organized Christianity and of course the faith of her youth, the Catholic Church. And so as she's kind of calling through these charities, she of course began with the government, then calling the secular organizations. They had a lot of stipulations, or they were already full and weren't able to help. Then she started calling some of the kind of mega churches, the big Christian charities in the area that were connected with some of the big churches. And they all had stipulations for it. They asked, is she willing to come to our church? Is she in our neighborhood? Is she, fill in the blank. They had kind of qualifications. We'll help her if she's willing to come to our church. We'll help her if she's willing to let us come and do a Bible study as well. We'll help her if she lives here, if these specific things. So my mom kept calling through the list, and last on her list was the St. Vincent de Paul Society. And she called this number, and the woman that answered said, "We'll be right there." They asked for her address, and they showed up. They didn't ask if she was Catholic. They didn't ask if she was willing to go to their church. They didn't ask if she met these qualifications or she lived in a certain area, or they just said, "We'll be right there." And this Catholic organization of lay people, and at the time I believe there were some Vincentian sisters that were also working with this parish, they showed up day after day to help her with some of the cleaning that she wasn't able to get to. They helped her watch her little one. They helped her get things set up around the house that would make it a little bit easier for her to get around on crutches and to reach the food and the things that she needed to continue to take care of herself and her son. And they continued to show up day after day. And after a while, they didn't preach. They didn't give her pamphlets. They didn't sit her down for a Bible study. Their lives and their service and their love spoke volumes to her about who they were and who God was. And so eventually she started to ask questions, and that led to really deep and beautiful conversations, and it led to this woman. She did go to church with them. She went through RCIA and became Catholic because of the love that they showed her. And when my mom followed up with her a couple of times through her healing process, and as she was going through the RCIA process, and she was able to share this witness with my mom as well. This incredible witness of love impacted not only this woman, but really had a deep impact on my mom. And so when my mom went through a series of trials in her own life and some big life changes, and began to kind of feel the Lord tugging at her heart again, it was the Catholic Church that she went back to first. And that's a long story for another day. I've shared it a little bit in our journals on the promises of the Rosary, a little bit of my mom's story and a little bit of this story. But this story really exemplifies love of neighbor. And that's what this fruit and, of course, the visitation, that's what Mary did. Mary heard about Elizabeth being pregnant, and she dropped what she was doing. She hit the road like right away. She hoofed it, hiking through the hill country to go help Elizabeth and to serve her in this time of need. And that's exactly what the St. Vincent de Paul Society did. And that is what we can learn as we think about the meditation, or meditate on the visitation, and really ask the Lord for the fruit of love of neighbor to grow in our own lives, that we can have the courage of the Vincentians, the courage of Mary, to drop whatever it is that feels important to us and to really love someone in need. And that's what this fruit is all about. This comes from, of course, the golden rule, Matthew 22, verse 39, when Jesus is talking about the two important things. And I'll read it. I'll back up a little bit. Matthew 22, verse 37. Jesus said, "You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your mind. This is the greatest, the great and the first commandment. And a second is like it. You shall love your neighbor as yourself. On these two commandments depends all the law and the prophets. Everything we do grows out of this. First and foremost, before we can love our neighbor, we have to love the Lord deeply and authentically. And out of that comes this love for neighbor, because, and this is the, the woman who broke her leg discovered who God was. She discovered this love of God and was able to put him first in her life because somebody came in and met some practical needs that she had. And through meeting the practical needs, she was able to open her eyes and her heart to kind of what was beyond. I'm sure she kind of asked herself, what's causing these people to drop what they're doing, to leave their busy lives, to come and help me in these, kind of maybe even like the mundane tasks of her day, cleaning and meal making. It prompted her to ask a question. What's different about them? And this golden rule, this, loving our neighbor, what this means, true love, is willing the good of the other. And that's what the woman who broke her leg experienced. They came into her life willing for her good, above their own good. They put her needs above some of their own wants. They put their life, their day on pause to go and serve. How are we called to do that? And I know that there's a lot of difficulty, and there's maybe even sometimes a temptation to neglect what we have going on at home and go and serve, especially when there's things that really, really tug at our heartstrings. And there in our lives, there's this beautiful, delicate and difficult balance of fulfilling the requirements and the needs of our vocation. This is our vocation. Serving our vocation is primary. It's loving God and putting God first. It is loving God with all of your heart, all of your soul, and your mind. And we do that primarily through our vocation. So when we are fulfilling the duties and the requirements of our vocation, then the Lord calls us to step out and to love our neighbors. And even this doesn't mean that we have to have it totally figured out, because we will never have it figured out, but it means there's no fires at home. The religious, their vocation is not, thinking particularly of the CFRs in the Bronx. These men, their call from the Lord is to serve the poorest of the poor in the inner city of New York. But their vocation is to love the Lord, and their service flows out of that. They couldn't just go out neglecting their prayer time, skipping mass and their communal prayer commitments to go out and serve the poor. And there's probably emergency situations where some of that might be required, but in general, they pray first, they worship first, and then they go out and serve. And in our vocation, those of us who are called to family life, to the vocation of marriage, our spouse is our vocation. The duties of our family come first. We don't neglect our spouse and our children to go serve at a soup kitchen, but we take care of the basic needs of our family. And then out of that love, that prayer, and even before, in kind of the order of love, we love God first. We love our spouse in the context of our vocation and our family, kind of in that order. and then neighbor comes after that. And so this can be reflected in our day. We'll get there. I'll put that on pause till we get to the practical. I wanted to share a quote from St. Vincent de Paul and a little bit more about who he is, who he was, his life that really kind of led him to become this, shining example of love of neighbor. So one of my favorite quotes from St. Vincent de Paul says, "If God is the center of your life, no words are necessary. Your mere presence will touch hearts." This is the mission of, or really embodies the mission of the St. Vincent de Paul Society at work in cities around the globe, probably your city. These people go and serve and love their neighbors, and you don't have to stand in a soapbox and preach to them. They know the love of God. They know, not just hear, not just read about, or like some intellectual understanding. They come to really know in their hearts the love of God because they feel that love from us. The same is true in the four walls of our home. And this Saint Therese, I promised you guys that I would really bring Saint Therese into this. She just really is one of the greats. So I'm going to stop apologizing for bringing her into this. But Saint Therese is a patron of missions, though her entire adult life was lived within the four walls of her convent. But she learned to love really well, and that love had incredible ripple effects beyond the walls of her convent. And so when we have a desire, and especially when we see the news and these horrible natural and man-made wars, the natural disasters and man-made wars, these things that happen that are all over the media that break our hearts, and we want to go and do something. And there's always a little something that we can do. But another famous quote Mother Teresa said, "If you want to change the world, go home and love your family." And all of this comes in the right order. We're talking today about loving our neighbor. And so I'm not trying to talk us out of going to love our neighbor, but I'm trying to impress upon you the importance of the order out of which this flows. I've got a long quote that really wraps this up that I'll finish with, so I want to make sure we leave time for that. In the life of St. Vincent de Paul, he served firstly as he served the Lord first, like he loved the Lord. He became a priest in a time, this is the early 1600s, in Paris, France, where the clergy, again, were very, put on a pedestal. They were members of high society. They were very often neglecting their duties as faithful priests to serve their congregation, to serve the poor around them, to really preach and teach truth. And St. Vincent saw this, and there are some saints who are kind of well known for their well known for reform. There's some who are kind of known for their passion or maybe even anger at the lack of faith among their fellow clergy. St. Vincent, while he may have been upset and brokenhearted, the lack of faithfulness of clergy caused him to lean into the work that the Lord called him to do. He opened up retreat houses. So I should add to this, of course, had an impact. St. Vincent, a few years after being ordained a priest, was traveling by ship and was captured by pirates and sold into slavery for 2 years until he managed to escape. And this, of course, gave him a love and an understanding for the poorest of the poor around him, because he was one of them. He was in total poverty as a slave, abused and incredibly mistreated. And so when he got back to Paris, he made that his mission to really love the poor. And he saw in them a great need for catechesis. They were struggling materially, but they were also struggling spiritually because the pastors who were put in charge were not loving and teaching them. And so St. Vincent began to put on retreats, and thousands each year would come to a retreat put on by St. Vincent and the community that he started. And he began to hold these retreats for the poorest of the poor and teach them, and not only teaching and loving, but then also meeting their material needs, because he knew that they would never be able to come on retreat. They'd never be able to pay attention and listen if their bellies were hungry, if things at home were literally and figuratively falling apart. So he also began the Sisters of Charity, became the religious order to serve the material needs of the poor, and a lay group of I forget the name of it, something else to do with charity, but this other lay organization to put on retreats. And so he began to really meet the needs, both spiritually first and foremost, and then also their very real material needs. And that continues to kind of be the work of the Vincentians and the St. Vincent de Paul Society today. And so practically, how can we take these lessons that we can learn from St. Vincent de Paul and what we learned from Mary in the Visitation and really put them to work in our lives? This is where the order of love really comes in. If we want to grow in love of neighbor, we first and foremost have to grow deeper in our love for the Lord. And this can be kind of, it will be a both and. It's not like we have to master our love for the Lord first, like check the box, good, okay, now we can move on to phase 2. This is a daily action. This shows up practically in our schedule for our day. First and foremost, the very first thing that we need to do is to give our day to the Lord and to spend some time with the Lord, worshiping, loving the Lord, and giving him all that we have and all that we are. And when our day begins like this, the rest of our day begins to fall into place. That right order begins to kind of settle in when we can have that foundation of loving the Lord and really spending that time and giving our first fruits, our first moments of the day to the Lord in prayer. For each of us, this looks different. It depends on our stage of life and what we have going on. But what matters is that we give the Lord that time. And some days it might just be a quick moment where we kneel down, as we're rushing out the door, we kneel at the side of our bed and we just give the Lord what we have. We give the Lord who we are. We give the Lord the things that we're worried about, the things in our mind, the parts of our day that are ahead. We give the Lord the people in our lives. We give the Lord our vocation. We give the Lord everything that we're feeling, all of the wonderful things that we're excited about and we're joyful about in the day to come, the things that we're worried about and concerned about. We give the Lord everything. We spend just a couple of minutes. That should be for us the foundation, kind of the minimum. Father Mike Schmidt one time talked about what is the floor, like understanding in the rough seasons or the busy days, what is the bare minimum that I am committed to doing that will keep me in relationship with the Lord. And from that floor, we know what we can build. We can add in longer prayer times. We can add in spiritual reading. We can add in 30 minutes in the morning of quiet contemplative prayer, of Lectio Divina, of daily Mass, of weekly adoration. We can add in all of these other good things as the Lord permits, as time permits, but we have this non-negotiable of meeting the Lord for whatever the bare minimum is, 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 15 minutes. And our bare minimum is giving to the Lord everything that we have, everything we are, and everything that's ahead of us. This is where we begin. In this moment, in this time that we give the Lord, He begins to deepen our relationship. And out of this flows the moments throughout the day that we can continue this conversation that we began first thing in the morning, where we continue to give the Lord the parts of the day that we mentioned to Him in the beginning, the things that are wonderful, the things that are trying and difficult, the people who we're praying for, new things that come to mind throughout the day. We're continuing to be in this conversation that we began at the beginning of the day with the Lord, giving all of this back to Him. This is our kind of modus operandi, where everything we have, good, bad, and in between, we're giving it back to the Lord. That's our foundation of this surrender and trust with the Lord. Out of that is our love that in Matthew 22:39, the Lord doesn't say, ignore yourself, neglect yourself, put yourself aside, and go and love your neighbor. He says to love our neighbor as ourselves. And this is kind of goes hand in hand with the cliche that we can't pour from an empty cup. So we need to take care of ourselves. And the foundation, the most important part of taking care of ourselves is taking care of our relationship with the Lord. And as we can take care of, as we are going through the day with our relationship with the Lord, and we are allowing the Lord to fill our cup, then we can begin to serve our neighbor. And when we're in this conversation with the Lord, we begin to know who is it that the Lord is placing into our life, that He wants us to love. Because there's a lot of opportunities, and our kind of instant access kind of news cycle where we're just inundated with all of these things, we can be misdirected. We can have these, like news flashes that we're getting pull us away from what the Lord is calling us to. And we can maybe even jump over the neighbors that are right in front of us that the Lord is calling us to serve, because this is the headline, this is tugging at our heart. And when we are in that conversation with the Lord, that, moment by moment, all throughout the day, then we can see who it is that the Lord is bringing into our life, that we're being called to love. Because otherwise we get distracted by the headlines and we miss the people right in front of us. This is a Catholic principle called subsidiarity, of doing the most good, the closest to home, and then allowing that kind of ripple effect. When we can take care of our neighbors, which might be our children or our family, that might be who the Lord is calling us to love and serve today. Taking care of those needs, then they're able, or as a family unit, we're able to then step out of the walls of our home and to go and serve. Maybe it is our next door neighbor. Somebody is hurt or sick and they need their walk shoveled. They need salt spread. They need some help around the house. Maybe our neighbor broke her leg, and that's who we're called to love and help in this moment. Maybe it's in our parish. Maybe there are some other families in our church or our school who need a little practical help. And because we've taken care of things at home, we're all able to go and love and serve them and help them with some handiwork things around the house, or get on top of chores, or, fill in the blank, bring a meal. Those kind of really simple things, those opportunities to love, the Lord will put in front of you when you are open to receiving them, because you're in this daily conversation built on a foundation of love of Him. I wanted to share this quote. It's from Father Thaddeus Datcher, who is a writer from the last couple of decades. I think he passed away about 10 or 15 years ago, and he has a couple of good books. Polish priest, I won't spell it, I'll put it in the notes. I'm probably even saying it wrong, but I'll put it in the notes so that you can copy and paste and go look for some of his books. Incredibly beautiful books, but this quote is one that I think really drives home what we're talking about with love of neighbor. He says, everything depends on God. It is He who decides, and only He can give you the strength. If He involves you in His work, it does not mean that you are irreplaceable. So many times, God has shown us that He can manage very well without us. If you have seen this in your life, then you have received a great grace. God does not need human intervention. But despite this, He wants to involve us in His redeeming work of saving the world. If, however, we feel that everything depends on us and our work, then we are trying to carry water in a sieve. When overworked, it's easy to forget that we should first of all want to have an audience with the one upon whom everything depends, who holds the fate of the world and the fate of each one of us in His hands. According to John Paul II, it is not important what you do, it is important who you are. It is important that you are a person of faith and prayer. By praying, we not only pay homage to Christ on our own behalf, but we worship Him in the name of the whole world, which either does not know how, or is unable to, or does not want to pray. One thing is certain: if we do not pray, no one will need us. The world does not need empty souls and hearts. When we ask what the relationship is between prayer and action, then the priority of prayer and sacrifice should be emphasized more than action. We can bring God into the lives of children whom we catechize, at home or in school, only to the extent of our having begged for it on our knees. The issue of the relationship between prayer and action can be summarized in this statement: all authentic action is born of prayer and contemplation. For everything that is great in this world comes from God. Everything that is great in this world is born of sacrifice and prayer. Everything that is great in this world is born of sacrifice and prayer. Sacrifice is love of neighbor. We're sacrificing our own wants to put the needs of other people ahead of the things that we want. And all of that comes from a foundation of prayer. I will copy this quote into the notes as well, because I would love for you guys to read this through, to really think and pray about this, because there is so much goodness packed into this. Have an awesome week, everybody. That's a wrap on our discussion of the visitation and the fruit of it, which is love of neighbor, and this incredible saint, St. Vincent de Paul, who is teaching us how to have, and even very practically, how to develop love of neighbor in our own lives. Have an awesome week. God bless.